Hello, my friends. Tonight, I invite you to take a deep breath, slow your mind, and let yourself sink into a history-infused sleep story, crafted to calm your thoughts and guide you gently into deep restorative rest. Together, we will reflect on extraordinary events from the past, illuminated by the warm, flickering glow of a crackling fire. A story perfect for quiet reflection at bedtime, or for drifting peacefully into sleep. Let the gentle rhythm of this narration and the soothing sound of the fireplace carry you into a night of stillness and tranquility. And before we begin, remember to subscribe, tap the notification bell, leave a kind like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay close and never miss a story. In this episode, we journey back to ancient Egypt to discover how they approached something we call today premature ejaculation, a modern medical term for what the Egyptians once described as weakness in sexual potency. So, let us begin our exploration. Rituals of magic and sexuality in ancient Egypt. From the shadows of prehistory, humankind searched for meaning, for the hidden forces of the body, and for the mysteries that stirred deep within the soul. When the ancient Egyptians rose to the height of their civilization along the banks of the Nile, their beliefs about the body, the spirit, and sexuality became tightly bound to the gods and the natural world. For them, sexual life was never viewed as something purely physical. It was part of a greater order, a sacred system that blended magic, ritual, religion, and medicine, all working together to preserve balance, fertility, and strength. This was a society that revered fertility and creation as the very foundation of life and power. Goddesses and gods, Isis and Osiris, Horus and Hathor, stood at the center of rituals that celebrated fertility, marriage, and love. In Egypt, sexuality was never taboo. It was embraced, celebrated as a natural cycle of life, a sacred energy to be guided with wisdom and channeled through proper rites. Here, magic, medicine, and nature were not separate. They were one force, inseparable and powerful. Priests and healers turned to amulets, herbs, incantations, and elaborate magical ceremonies to help people overcome sexual troubles, including what we might now recognize as performance disorders, such as premature release. The great medical papyri, like the Ebers Papyrus and the Lahun Papyrus, contain not only remedies, but also prayers, spells, and specialized formulas for creating ointments and elixirs. They are among the earliest traces of efforts to treat sexual disorders. The Egyptians left behind no exact word for premature ejaculation in the way we understand it today, but their writings reveal clues, descriptions of weakness in performance, a loss of vitality, or an imbalance between the physical and spiritual forces of a man. To them, the answer was never a single cure. It was about restoring harmony, body and soul, while calling upon the powers of the gods to renew desire and strengthen sexual energy. Magic in Egyptian sexual life was not superstition to be dismissed. It was believed to shape reality itself. Rituals ranged from sacred words carved into amulets, to chants sung by temple priests, to herbal salves prepared with precision in temple chambers or bustling markets. Priests were both scientists and magicians, treating illness with knowledge of plants and with the unseen powers of the divine. And even in a culture that honored sexual vitality, they knew difficulties could arise: weakness, inability to sustain desire, or the swiftness of climax. They had no neat medical names for such conditions. Instead, they saw them as signs of imbalance, the touch of an evil spirit, or even the curse of an enemy. Treatments were always holistic, blending herbal remedies, sacred amulets,
and rituals that called on divine guardians for strength and protection.
A man troubled in this way might walk into the temple courtyard, bow before the priests, and receive a treatment meant to heal both flesh and spirit. The Ebers Papyrus stands as one of the oldest, most celebrated medical texts in history, dating back to around 1550 BCE in Egypt's New Kingdom. Within its thousands of lines were detailed instructions for healing, including remedies for fertility. The ancient papyri also spoke of problems and difficulties in the bedchamber. They described remedies of honey, tar, rare herbs, and other natural elements, valued not only for their physical properties, but for the spiritual resonance they carried. In Egyptian medicine, a cure was never purely physical. It was always a plea to the unseen, a call to powers beyond the flesh. Other papyri, such as the Kahun and the Lahun, revealed further methods for preserving a man's sexual vitality. Weakness in desire was often seen as the life force itself being interrupted, or as the shadow of an evil presence pressing down on him. To heal it, one might be cleansed with sacred oils, or wear a talisman blessed in the name of Isis or Hathor. Another might drink a potion of blue lotus, mustard seeds, honey, and milk, prepared while invocations were spoken, words meant to awaken the hidden power of the mixture. The story of Ammonet. Among these ancient accounts lies a tale still whispered by the sands of Egypt, the story of a man named Ammonet. He was haunted by the swiftness of his release, troubled by the shame it brought him, and desperate to reclaim his strength as a man. This is the story of how he sought his cure. In the very heart of the Nile Valley, where ancient Egyptian civilization flourished beside the life-giving river, lived a man called Ammonet. He served as a priest in the great temple of Amun at Thebes during the reign of the mighty pharaoh Ramses II. Ammonet was a man in his prime, devoted each day to sacred rituals that upheld the divine order. Yet beneath his calm, disciplined exterior, he carried a private torment, a condition that modern medicine would name premature ejaculation. This lingering affliction, the shadow of a past illness, threatened his ability to fully consummate his marriage with his beloved wife Nefertari. It cast a heavy darkness over their hopes for fertility and for the joy they longed to share. This is the story of Ammonet's journey through the rich and intricate spiritual landscape of ancient Egypt, where sexuality was never just an act of flesh. It was a sacred rite intimately bound to the divine forces of creation and renewal. For in Egypt, sex embodied the very power of the gods themselves, a source of life, fertility, and healing. And so Ammonet's quest began with the foundational myths preserved by the temple priests. According to the great Egyptian creation stories, the god Adam emerged from the primordial chaos through an act of self-creation. From his own essence, he brought forth the world, masturbating to produce the gods Shu and Tefnet. This primal gesture carried more than myth. It symbolized sexual potency itself, as the very origin of life, fertility, and creation. In temples such as Colombo, statues of Men, the god of fertility, were carved with erect phalluses, powerful emblems of eternal virility and unending strength. Sexuality for the Egyptians was woven seamlessly into the natural rhythms of life. It was tied to the annual flood of the Nile, which symbolized abundance, rebirth, and the renewal of all living things. Imagine Amun-Khet, the temple priest, taking part in grand annual ceremonies where the pharaoh's seed was ritually cast into the Nile.
These sacred acts invoke the myth of Osiris, the god who lost his manhood only to be restored through the devotion of his wife, Isis. Such rites were more than public affirmations of fertility. They were deeply personal acts of spiritual empowerment, rituals that bound the people to the gods and renewed their faith in creation. Women, too, sought divine favor. They wore erotic amulets dedicated to Hathor, goddess of love and sensuality, charms meant to attract passion and strengthen their bonds with their partners. Though sexual activity was at times seen as conflicting with ritual purity, the Egyptians used Heka, the magic at the very heart of their spirituality, to harness and magnify sexual energy beyond the temple walls. Rituals featured talismans of carnelian and amethyst, stones believed to encourage frequent union. Priests spoke prayers to Adam during sacred rites of masturbation, words intended to generate immense magical force. To the Egyptians, sex was inseparably linked to death and rebirth, mirroring the myth of Osiris's death and resurrection. During festivals, this myth was reenacted through ritual sexual unions, ceremonies meant to renew the very fabric of existence itself. Even pharaohs were not exempt. They performed sacred masturbation into the waters of the Nile, an act believed to guarantee the river's bounty, reflecting the conviction that semen carried within it the divine force of life. But as Ammonet's condition grew worse, his desperation deepened. He turned to Heka, the magic that stood at the very core of Egyptian belief, a fusion of words, images, and ritual designed to heal, to transform, and to restore balance. Seeking to recover his strength, Ammonet consulted a sorcerer named Pata Muse. In the dim glow of the temple fire, the priest raised his voice in a spell invoking Osiris himself. "O Osiris, restore your power, as Isis restored your member." Then, with solemn care, the priest anointed Ammonet's body with a sacred mixture of honey, milk, and pomegranates, substances believed to stir desire, to quicken the blood, and to reawaken passion. The lotus flower, sacred to Hathor, played a central role in these rites. Its petals were used to inflame lust, grant potency, and induce trance-like states of ecstasy, pulling the worshipper closer to the divine. Other celebrations, like the Opet festival, were grand communal events, filled with music, drinking, and public sexual rites that reenacted the resurrection of Osiris through sacred union. Erotic dolls and sensual dances were central to these ceremonies, highlighting sexuality as a cosmic force of renewal and life. Spells against impotence involved drawing protective symbols on the body, alongside heartfelt prayers to Bes, the god who safeguarded sexual health. Amulets made of sacred woods and stones carried the power of the gods themselves, while women sometimes used magical dolls to enchant their husbands, echoing the legendary powers of Isis. Colors held meaning too. Red symbolized sexual potency and divine blood. Love spells were inscribed onto papyrus and burned to attract desired partners. Ammonet fully immersed himself in these rituals, which were widely practiced across Egyptian society. Recipes to overcome impotence included special ointments combined with spoken incantations. Even the pharaohs mummified their manhood, believing it preserved their vigor into the afterlife. On one occasion, Ammonet and Nefertari donned turquoise amulets, symbolizing strength, chanting prayers to Bes while using herbs such as ginger, garlic, and lettuce as natural aphrodisiacs. Women wore necklaces of lotus to ignite passion. Erotic dances imitating divine unions were performed in temples, and amulets shaped like genitalia were common in women's rituals. Honey and dates were combined into mixtures for men believed to boost energy and vitality. This magical medical system regarded sexual power as essential to balancing the cosmos itself. Regarding what modern science calls premature ejaculation, the ancient Egyptians saw it as a general weakness of sexual function. While no specific ritual directly targeted it, treatments aimed to delay climax and strengthen endurance. The lotus was highly prized, often used in ointments to reduce sensitivity. Ammonet applied such an ointment while invoking Hathor. "O Hathor, slow the rush, as the Nile slows its flood." Other herbs, like okra and ginger, were taken to prolong stamina,
Physical exercises resembling modern Kegel routines were practiced during sacred rites to strengthen the body's muscles. Spells focused on sustaining power and controlling release, inspired by the myth of Odin's self-mastery. This condition was understood as an imbalance in the Ka, or life spirit, which rituals sought to restore. Ointments containing poppy or mandrake soothed the nerves, while garlic and honey were believed to build stamina. Wild lettuce treated both premature ejaculation and nocturnal emissions. Fertility festivals featured public sexual rites to ensure the prosperity of the land. Sacred prostitution connected to Hathor was viewed as a divine act of arousal and empowerment. Ammonet participated in one such festival, drinking wine infused with herbs and performing erotic dances, reclaiming his vitality and vigor. The multi-day Oped festival staged dramatic reenactments of Osiris's resurrection, including symbolic sexual acts believed to renew the earth itself. Pilgrims shared prayers and amulets in group ceremonies, drawing magical power from sexual energy, as embodied in the eternal myth of Isis and Osiris. The influence of Egyptian sexual magic extended far beyond the banks of the Nile, shaping practices in Greece and Rome. Love spells and dream incubation techniques traveled from Alexandria to Greece, blending with Dionysian rituals and later making their way to Rome's festivals in honor of Venus. The legacy of these ancient rites endures even today in modern approaches to sexual health, with the lotus still revered as a natural remedy for potency and vitality. Concepts of awakening inner energy, akin to Kundalini, and embodying semen, the dynamic sexual force, trace their roots back to these timeless traditions. In the ancient world of Amun-Khet, herbal medicine was intricately woven with spiritual practice, especially in matters of sexual health. At the center of his treatments stood the sacred lotus flower, praised for its ability to enhance potency and cure impotence by improving blood circulation. Alongside the lotus, pomegranate and dates served as vital sources of energy, while garlic was prized for boosting circulation throughout the body. Ammonet's healing rituals often involved anointing with a special blend of lotus and honey, performed under the protective invocation of Hathor, goddess of love and fertility. Other herbs, like poppy, were used to calm the rush of premature climax, while mandrake stood as a potent counterpart to Asian ginseng. In total, the Egyptians employed 37 natural substances to combat impotence, including walnuts and pine nuts. These remedies came in the form of ointments and drinks, always accompanied by prayers to the gods. In these ancient practices, the line between medicine and magic was intentionally blurred. Treatments for impotence frequently combined healing oils infused with spells administered by healers who were as much sorcerers as physicians. Ammonet himself received olive oil mixed with aromatic herbs, along with an inscribed amulet believed to channel divine power. Additional therapies included cupping and needle techniques resembling modern acupuncture.
One notable aphrodisiac was derived from African plants, highlighting the far-reaching knowledge of Egyptian sexual medicine. Magic played a critical role in healing, incorporating spells and even ritual dolls intended to restore sexual function. Love incantations were carefully written on papyrus and burned to release their mystical power. A sorcerer named Pomosi used a specially crafted doll to cast a spell designed to delay ejaculation, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of sexual control. Sorcery also involved the use of animal parts, such as crocodile hearts, believed to imbue strength, vitality, and potency. These practices were particularly advanced, demonstrating that sexual health in ancient Egypt was more than a private concern. It was a spiritual, magical, and deeply social force intertwined with the very fabric of life in the cosmos. In rural villages, practices involving voodoo-like dolls served as focal points for magical direction, guiding energy and intention in ways both subtle and profound. Through these intricate rituals and remedies, Amun-Khet ultimately regained his strength and virility, a testament to ancient Egypt's profound understanding of sexuality as a fundamental force of life. While treatments for premature ejaculation were generalized, they centered on restoring balance through a careful combination of magic and herbal medicine. This narrative reveals a civilization that revered sex not merely as a physical act, but as a sacred bridge between humanity and the divine, a legacy that continues to echo through time. The second tale, the journey of Pakan-Ra. In the shadow of the mighty Karnak temple, where the sun embraced towering gateway columns and its light danced upon the still waters of the Nile, a man named Pakan-Ra walked with hesitant steps toward the priest's chamber. The air was thick with the scent of incense drifting from the great hypostyle hall, while the sound of sacred chants echoed through the stone corridors, as if voices from the realm of the gods themselves had found earthly form. Along the walls, carved reliefs told stories of kings offering gifts to the gods of fertility, and the temple seemed to hum with a sacred, timeless power. Pakan-Ra carried a burden known only to his wife, a secret that weighed on his sense of manhood and gnawed at his standing within the community. 3 years had passed since their marriage, and in that time, intimate moments had become a source of dread. His pleasure came too quickly, leaving his wife unsatisfied and his own confidence shattered. In a culture where fertility and procreation were sacred pillars of life, such a flaw was more than personal. It cast a shadow upon his honor. He entered the priest's hall where the dim glow of oil lamps cast shifting shadows upon lotus-carved columns and the elegant shapes of swans etched into stone. Before him sat the high priest Menuhotep, a man with white beard and eyes that seemed to see into the soul more than the flesh. He wore a robe of fine linen, and around his neck hung a golden pendant bearing the eye of Horus, a symbol of protection and strength. The priest reached for a small wooden chest, its surface carved with symbols of the gods of love and fertility. From it he drew a talisman shaped like a bitter gourd inscribed with the marks of Isis and Osiris, and a small vessel containing golden honey, mustard seeds, and the blue lotus flower. Its fragrance was a perfect marriage of sweetness and warmth, a fragrance born of faith in the gifts of the earth and the blessings of the sky. Menuhotep placed a hand on Pakan-Ra's shoulder and spoke with solemn authority. "My son, this is not merely medicine. It is a gift from the gods, a union of earth's strength and heaven's secret. Anoint your body with it before you embrace your wife, and speak these words. As the Nile flows without ceasing, so let my strength flow through my body without faltering. When you feel the warmth of life in your veins, you will know the gods have heard you." Pakan-Ra thanked the priest, holding the talisman and vessel as though they were treasures beyond price. He left Karnak with steadier steps, his eyes lifted to the clear sky over Thebes.
In the nights that followed, he felt some improvement, yet the strength he longed for still eluded him. Driven by this lingering need, he sought another healer, a man named Sekhemhotep, renowned in the craftsman's quarter for his skill with rare herbs. There, Pakan-Ra spoke more openly, describing in detail how his pleasure ended abruptly, as if a flowing stream of water had been cut off without warning. Sekhemhotep listened in silence, then prepared a new remedy: powdered fenugreek blended with papyrus oil, combined with the pulp of red dates, to be used while reciting a sacred incantation before sunset. Each evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Pakan-Ra sat on his balcony overlooking the Nile, carefully mixing the fenugreek powder with papyrus oil, folding in the red date pulp until it became a warm, fragrant paste. He placed it in a small clay vessel etched with the papyrus blossom, then massaged it slowly into his skin while reciting the words taught by Sekhemhotep. "O gods of the Nile, let my strength be as your current, and my heat as the warmth of Ra's sun." 7 days passed, and with each night his body felt renewed. Yet deep within, a part of him still sensed something missing, as though the cure he sought required more than fleshly healing, as though his spirit needed its own restoration. So he journeyed to the temple of Hathor at Dendera, a place famed for its rites of love and fertility. There, a priestess greeted him, her robe of white linen woven with bright colors, holding a silver vessel filled with water perfumed with rose petals and blue lotus. She instructed him to bathe in the sacred water under the full moon, then to enter a small chamber whose walls were painted with scenes of the gods in divine embrace. The air filled with the scent of incense as she began to chant ancient prayers. That night, for the first time, Pakin-Ra felt a deep peace in his heart. He understood then that true healing lay in the union of body and soul, in restoring the sacred connection within himself. He left Dendera carrying the herbal blend from Sheksham-Hotep, the talisman from Mentu-Hotep, and the blessing of the priestess of Hathor at Dendera. In his heart, he believed that the union of these three forces would return his strength and restore his balance. A few days later, the night arrived when he knew everything was ready. The moon was full, casting silver light through the window of his home, the Nile reflecting it in shimmering ripples. Pakin-Ra sat on a linen mat. Before him lay the clay vessel of herbs and oil, the golden talisman from Karnak, and a small cup of wine sweetened with honey. He began the ritual as he had been taught, anointing his body slowly from his feet upward to his chest, until a gentle warmth spread through him. He pressed the talisman to his heart, speaking Mentu-Hotep's words in a calm voice, then added the blessings from the priestess of Hathor at Dendera. He felt the room fill with an unseen energy, and his body responded as the earth responds to the gentle rains of spring. When his wife entered, the glow of candles and the fragrant smoke of incense transformed the room into a sacred hall. He approached her slowly, his eyes holding the confidence he had long believed lost. That night was not merely physical. It was a celebration, a triumph over fear, a reunion of body and spirit. In the morning, she smiled at him and whispered that nothing they had shared before could compare to this night. Pakin-Ra realized then that his journey through healers and temples had been more than a search for a cure. It had been a search for his truest self. In the years that followed, Pakin-Ra became a voice for the union of medicine and the spiritual, advising all who sought his guidance never to neglect the power of ritual and belief alongside the remedies of the body. For only then could a person live in complete balance, in harmony of body, mind, and soul. Sex in the age of the ancient pharaohs. Sex as a force of life and culture. Sex in the age of the pharaohs between 3100 and 30 BC was far more than a biological act. It was a vital force that connected human beings to the gods, that tied the earth to the heavens, that bridged life and death. In the Old Kingdom, from 2686 to 2181 BC, sex was seen as the living symbol of fertility, like the annual flooding of the Nile that brought renewal to the land. The Nile itself was imagined as divine semen, fertilizing the soil just as a man fertilizes a woman. This sacred idea appears in early carvings at Saqqara, where people carried phallic statues of men, the god of male fertility. These statues, carved from stone or wood, were carried in processions or placed inside temples. Touching them was believed to bring blessings. Even at the Luxor temple, the traces of countless hands can still be seen on the statues of men, signs of a tradition that survived into later centuries. In the Middle Kingdom, between 2050 and 1710 BC, sex became more expressive in literature. The famous tale, The Story of the Two Brothers, tells how the wife of Anubis attempted to seduce his brother Bata. She whispered to him in sensual words, describing her body. "Come, let us spend an hour together. I will make you feel pleasure." Written on the Ebers Papyrus around 1800 BC, the story presents sex as a dramatic force. Desire here creates betrayal, conflict, and moral judgment. Bata, to prove his innocence, cuts off his own manhood, a shocking act that transforms lust into tragedy. This tale mirrors later traditions, like the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife, showing how Egyptian stories shaped later cultures. In the New Kingdom, from 1550 to 1070 BC,
openness towards sex reached its peak. The Turin erotic papyrus, dated to around 1150 BC and preserved today in the Turin Museum, depicts 12 erotic scenes. A bald man with beautiful women, bodies twisted in impossible positions, and moments of humor with animals acting like humans. Some scholars see it as political satire, others as pure entertainment, but in both cases, it reveals how sex was not hidden. It was accepted as part of pleasure, ritual, and life. Even in the late period, from 664 to 332 BC, when Egypt came under foreign influence, sex retained its sacred power. Amulets of the dwarf god Bes, shown with an enormous phallus, were worn to protect pregnant women and children from evil. A reminder that sexuality in Egypt remained holy even when the empire itself began to crumble. Everyday intimacy, the villages of workers. To understand how sexuality shaped daily life, we can look to the village of Deir el-Medina. This was home to the workers who built the tombs of the kings. They lived in small mud brick houses, 3 to 4 rooms, often filled with extended families. Privacy was rare. Intimacy between husband and wife often took place with children or servants nearby. Tomb paintings even show couples in intimate positions surrounded by family scenes, proving that sex was woven into the rhythms of life. Ancient Egyptian medical texts also revealed their approach. The Ebers Papyrus from around 1500 BC describes treatments for sexual weakness, remedies made from lettuce, honey, or even the brain of a catfish, along with spells that called upon the goddess Hathor to ignite desire. For the Egyptians, medicine was always mixed with magic. Sexual failure could be explained by curses or envy, just as much as by physical weakness.
Regional differences. Not all regions of Egypt experienced sexuality the same way. In the northern delta, trade with the Near East brought foreign practices. Perfumes like the lotus of the Nile were used to seduce. In the south, in Upper Egypt, traditions remained more religious. Festivals for men and Hathor featured processions of phallic statues. Men and women gathered, touched the symbols, and prayed for fertility. Sexuality adapted to place, to culture, to the balance between tradition and change. Sex in myth and ritual, the gods as symbols of desire. As centuries passed, Egyptian mythology grew more complex. The gods themselves became symbols of sexuality. Sex was not only about human desire, it was the secret of creation, renewal, and cosmic balance. Men and the festivals of fertility. The god Men, worshipped at Akhmim, was always shown with an erect phallus. His statues were carried in processions, where men and women touched them to ask for fertility. Even in Luxor Temple, the worn stone still shows where hands reached for blessing. Lettuce, because of its milky sap, was sacred to men. It was eaten in rituals, believed to increase sexual strength. Texts describe offerings of lettuce to men with prayers like, "O men, grant power to the one who plays with you." Festivals included dances, songs, and symbolic unions of the gods. Osiris and Isis, sex as resurrection. The myth of Osiris is among the most powerful. After being murdered and cut into pieces by his brother Seth, Osiris is reassembled by his wife, the goddess Isis. Through her magic, she revives his body and conceives their son Horus. Ancient papyri describe how Isis aroused the phallus of the dead Osiris, turning death into creation. This act symbolized renewal. It was also linked to mummification rituals where sexual regeneration was essential for eternal life. In tombs of the New Kingdom, even in the treasures of Tutankhamun, we find carvings of Isis as a bird hovering over the phallus of Osiris, a divine image of sacred conception. Seth and Horus, homosexuality in myth. One of the most unusual myths is the conflict between Seth and Horus. Seth attempts to rape Horus, believing that sexual domination will prove his superiority. But Horus deceives him. Instead, Seth himself is tricked into becoming pregnant from semen. The story, found in papyri such as those from Cajon around 1800 BC, is not about desire alone. It is about power, humiliation, and cosmic struggle. In some texts, Seth even praises Horus's body, saying, "How beautiful is your backside," a line that mixes sexuality with politics. The myth shows how Egyptians could weave even homosexuality into their tales, but always tied to rivalry and dominance. Hathor and female sexuality. The goddess Hathor, worshipped at Dendera, was the embodiment of love and female desire. Her festivals were wild, with women dancing naked, holding mirrors and sistrums, symbols of beauty and attraction. Temple carvings from the Ptolemaic period show these rituals. Songs describe women's bodies in sensual metaphors. Her lips are like honey. Her embrace is like a fruitful palm tree. In myth, Hathor even seduces the sun god Ra, renewing his fading strength with her sexuality. For Egyptians, sex was not only human pleasure, it was divine medicine. In the late period, Bes, astrology, and the evolution of sexuality. In the late period, the god Bes became a symbol of fertility and protection. Amulets depicting him with a large phallus were worn to protect pregnant women and children from evil spirits. The Brooklyn Papyrus, dating around 600 BC, records spells invoking Bes to treat impotence, such as, "O Bes, awaken strength in so-and-so's body." This shows how sexuality evolved from an agricultural symbol to a personal and spiritual force.
Sex and astronomy. The Egyptians linked sexuality to the stars. Astronomers in temples like Karnak would determine the timing of sexual activity according to the zodiac, believing the stars influenced fertility. For example, the blue lotus of the Nile was used as an aphrodisiac at specific times based on celestial positions. This connection is reflected in temple architecture designed to align with the cosmos. Sacred sexual rituals were performed according to these astronomical timings. Historical analysis, gender and power. Sexual ideas evolved alongside gender and authority. In the Old Kingdom, sexuality was largely male-centered. By the New Kingdom, goddesses such as Isis and Hathor held more influence, reflecting progress in women's rights. Texts celebrated women as sources of sexual power, such as love songs from the era of Ramesses II. Marriage and family life, romance, practicality, and women's rights. From myth to social life, marriage was simple. A woman moved to the man's house, often in a small procession. In the Old Kingdom, the year of eating together allowed couples to test compatibility for a full year, as shown in the Doshur documents, which also specified inheritance rights for women. Women had legal equality, as in the case of Bishenubi during the Middle Kingdom, who divorced her husband and retained her property. Daily life and romance. Sex was part of everyday life. Affectionate nicknames like soft cat or hot leopard were common. Love songs from Ramesses II's era describe her lips are like honey, her embrace surpasses gold. Childbirth was a female-centered ritual, with midwives using birthing chairs and protective spells against Seth, as depicted in the tomb of Inkarha in the New Kingdom. Premarital sex was accepted, and illegitimate children were integrated into families, as shown in the Lahun records, where they inherited like their legitimate siblings. Divorce and women's rights. Divorce was simple. A man could declare, "I dismiss you," and the woman received up to a third of the property. Royal sexuality in ancient Egypt, a continuous, in-depth narrative. Expanding on earlier discussions of sexuality in daily life, let us now focus on royal sexuality, a unique domain reflecting the intersection of political power, religion, and culture. Royal sex was not merely a personal relationship of the pharaohs. It was a tool to preserve divine purity, reinforce legitimacy, and secure cosmic balance. This narrative follows a chronological structure, highlighting historical details, archaeological examples, and analyses across Egypt's Old, Middle, and New kingdoms. New contexts such as harems, dynastic marriages, and royal rituals are included based on texts and artifacts to provide a comprehensive understanding of this aspect. Royal sexuality, religious and political context. In pharaonic Egypt, the pharaoh was considered the son of the god Ra, or Amun, making him a divine being with sacred sexual power. Royal sex was not merely for pleasure. It was necessary to renew creation and maintain cosmic balance. In the Old Kingdom, 2686 to 2181 BC, royal marriages focused on choosing wives from the royal family to preserve the purity of the bloodline. For example, Pharaoh Khufu married his sister or daughter to maintain the divine lineage. These practices were not forbidden, they were sacred, depicted in Giza pyramid inscriptions showing the pharaoh with his wives in religious rituals. During the Middle Kingdom, 2050 to 1710 BC, dynastic marriages became even more pronounced. Pharaoh Senimsret III married his daughter to secure power after the death of his chief wife.
Texts from this period, such as the Kahun Papyrus, describe sexual rituals between the pharaoh and priestesses performed in temples to renew the power of the god Amun. In the New Kingdom, 1550 to 1070 BC, royal sexuality reached its peak with Ramesses II, who married his daughter Bent Anat, seeing this as a symbol of divine power. In the late period, 664 to 332 BC, practices were influenced by foreign cultures, yet royal sexuality remained a symbol of authority as seen during the reign of Cleopatra VII. Cosmic balance. The Egyptians believed royal sex renewed cosmic order. At Karnak Temple, rituals involved the pharaoh symbolically marrying a goddess, such as Mut or Hathor, represented by a priestess, to ensure the annual Nile flood. These rituals, documented in New Kingdom inscriptions, included dances and sensual songs, such as descriptions of the pharaoh meeting the goddess in her embrace. Royal marriages, divine purity and its implications. Family marriages were a prominent feature of royal sexuality. In the Old Kingdom, pharaohs married their sisters or daughters to preserve divine purity. For example, in the dynasty of Pharaoh Khufu, inscriptions in the pyramids of Giza depict his wives surrounded by a divine aura. This practice was not random. Religious texts emphasize that royal blood must remain pure to maintain connection with the gods. In the Middle Kingdom, this tradition intensified, as in the case of Pharaoh Amenemhat III, who married his daughter to secure the dynasty after the deaths of his other wives. Texts from Lahun describe rituals in which the pharaoh offered tributes to the god Horus after marriage, symbolizing the renewal of divine covenant. During the New Kingdom, family marriages became even more prominent with Ramesses II, who married both his daughter Bent Anat and his daughter Meret Mut, as depicted in the inscriptions at Abu Simbel. These marriages occasionally led to hereditary problems, as seen with Tutankhamun, who suffered deformities from marrying his sister Ankhesenamun. Health implications. Family marriages often resulted in weakened genetics, as modern studies of Tutankhamun's remains reveal flat feet and spinal issues. Nevertheless, ancient Egyptians interpreted such anomalies as divine signs, with texts declaring that the pharaoh bears the marks of the gods. The royal harem. Centers of sex and power. The royal harem was the heart of royal sexuality, housing hundreds of women from across the empire. In the Old Kingdom, the harem was small, but it expanded during the New Kingdom, as under Thutmose III, who had around 200 wives and concubines. The harem was not merely a place of pleasure, it was a political instrument. Marriages with foreign princes and princesses strengthened alliances and secured loyalty. During the New Kingdom, the harem became more organized, such as in the queen's palace at Tanis, where inscriptions show women performing symbolic sexual rituals to renew the pharaoh's power. The chief queen, like Nefertiti, wielded significant influence, depicted alongside Akhenaten in religious and sexual ceremonies. Texts from this period describe concubines participating in rituals, with phrases such as the pharaoh chooses from the harem on the night of fertility. In the late period, the harem was increasingly influenced by foreign customs, as under Cleopatra, who used the harem as a diplomatic tool with Caesar and Antony. Roman accounts describe Cleopatra presenting women from the harem as gifts to strengthen alliances. Royal rituals. Sex as a religious act. Royal sexuality was an integral part of religious ritual. In the Old Kingdom, the pharaoh would symbolically marry a goddess, such as Hathor in the Temple of Dendra, represented by a priestess, to renew fertility. These rituals, documented in Dendra's inscriptions, included sensual dances and songs, such as the goddess opens her embrace to the pharaoh. In the New Kingdom, rituals became more elaborate, such as in Karnak, where the pharaoh ceremonially married Amun in the form of a priestess during the Opet festival. Texts describe the pharaoh entering a sacred chamber with the priestess, where intercourse was believed to renew the god's power. Under Ramesses II, the Abu-Simbel inscriptions depict the pharaoh presenting himself as the god's consort, with priests overseeing the ritual.